Hey there, everyone. I'm Stephen Petronio, and I'm speaking to you from Round Top, New York, high up in the Catskills at the Petronio Residency Center, where I've been hunkering down since March and looking forward to a different kind of winter this year. Welcome to the second installation of the virtual Bloodlines Festival. I have an initiative with the Stephen Petronio Company called Bloodlines, and some of you may know what it's about, but I thought it might be really interesting to begin to look at the great minds that have influenced me over the course of my career. And I really came up during the post-Judson period, and I got to be around a lot of the people who were in Judson Dance Theater, like Trisha Brown, like Steve Paxton, like Anna Halpern, like Lucinda Childs. So I've curated over the last 6 years a number of works that have been deeply important to me and that have helped to shape me as a choreographer in the early days and on even now. And so we've done 11 different reconstructions over the last 6 years. And we look forward to doing some more. And we have a Bloodlines Future where I'm looking at the next generation of artists that have been influenced by Judson. And one of our guests tonight, it will be part of the Bloodlines Future initiative. The festival will run until November 14th, and it will include one more live conversation, a masterclass, and then a deep dive into the archive. If you want to learn more about the festival, please go to www.patron.io/BLF Bloodlines Festival. So this is our second installation, and I have two monolithic works that we've restaged that I believe are two of the most influential works of the late 20th century. And one of them is Trisha Brown's Glacial Decoy that was choreographed in 1979. And the other is Merce Cunningham's RainForest from 1968. You know, when I was conceiving Bloodlines, Merce had just passed away and Trisha had become gravely ill. And I just really began to think about these people, and I was just greedy. I wanted their work close to me because I loved them so much. And so my instinct was to try and embody their work. And, you know, one of the things about Bloodlines that I find that I feel is crucial is that we embody these works while there are people who have been taught by the masters who made them. And so that's really part of kind of the heart of Bloodlines. The reason I've chosen these two works to pair these two works tonight is also because they are both examples of incredible multidisciplinary collaborations. An amazing visual artist, in Merce's case, an incredible musician and composer. And I think you'll, you know, looking at these works, if it's the first time you've seen them, you're going to be very interested. And if it's not the first time, it'll be like reading Moby Dick again, or whatever you love to read again. How much fun I have looking at these works over and over again. So I want to introduce my two esteemed guests, Wendy Perron, who is a dancer, choreographer, teacher, and writer, editor-in-chief of Dance Magazine from 2004 to 2013. Her latest book is now available, titled The Grand Union, Accidental Anarchists of Downtown Dance, 1970 to 1976. And I'm in the middle of it. And you better read it because it's really interesting. And, you know, having insight into these great minds is really exciting. So thank you for this, Wendy, and welcome.
Thank you. And before we go on to Deva, I just want to say that one of the things about these two works is that you can't see them anywhere else now. The Stephen Petronio company is the only company that's doing these works because the Merce Cunningham company is no longer, and the Trisha Brown company is doing limited stuff. So
thank you, Wendy. So our second guest, and this is kind of a generational spread. So Wendy was in the Trisha, by the way, Wendy and I were both in the Trisha Brown company, but at different times. And so Wendy was right before me, and Davalois Fearon, who is our second guest, was a member of my company for 13 years. What a crazily talented dancer she was. We had so much fun touring the world together. And she was my director of education for 3 years. She really helped, you know, I've been teaching and developed my language for many, many years, but David really was right up there helping me to formalize it in a way that can be passed on to other people. So thank you for that, David, and welcome.
Hello, I'm absolutely over the moon to be here. Super excited about this.
Well, I also want to say that since she's moved on to other pastors, she's founded her own company, Davalois Fearon Dance, and has been lauded by colleagues as unapologetic, and I can avow for that, and by critics as electrifying. So, I'm really pleased to have you both with me. Let me introduce Glacial Decoy. So in 1979, I got into the Trisha Brown company, and I was the first man. And there were some of the most powerful women on the planet in New York dancing. And Trisha, of course, she was a miracle on two legs. And I was a rough, sweaty kid out of college, and I came into the company, and they had just premiered Glacial Decoy, a work in silence. With costumes by Robert Rauschenberg and decor by sets, visual design by Robert Rauschenberg, and watching those four women. So I had begged Trisha to let me be in that piece, but she was like, "No, this is for women, and you know, I want a man in the company, but this is going to be my my last piece for all women, at least for now. And so, you cannot learn it. So she really wouldn't let me learn it. But as a result, I got to watch it over and over and over again because I was in rehearsal. And it really did have a profound impact on me. For those of you who know Glacial Decoy, it's a really amazing combination of this pristine formal structure that that is quite simple and that moves in and out of the proscenium, implying the world outside the stage. But it's embodied by this crazy, loopy, extended movement. And that combination I found irresistible and really has had a big impact on me. And my personal interest in more loose, freewheeling movement was in the extension of that movement out into space. So really, Glacial Decoy was right up my alley. And for those of you who know what I do, I've kind of pushed that further down the line. So, Wendy, did you want to say anything else about Glacial Decoy?
Well, I just want to say it's the first piece that Trisha made for the proscenium stage. And she, whatever she figured out her boundaries were, she always broke those boundaries. And I think about halfway through this piece, you start to see how the dancers do sort of extend out to all sides. And the piece is in silence, but I feel like the way that the photographs move across the space gives the piece a steady rhythm. And against that steady rhythm, you'll see these incredible, irregular, springy, incredibly intricate movements that Trisha has the dancers doing.
Yeah, those images are very precisely timed and evenly timed. And I always thought it was like a train passing behind the dance in slow motion.
I think Rauschenberg might have thought of it as a train also, because the very last one is like a railroad crossing with RR, his initials. So when you see that coming in, that's the last one.
It was a very cheeky way for him to sign the piece. I love that.
Yeah.
So yeah, Wendy mentioned that it is performed in silence, so feel free to cough and to breathe deeply. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat on the right-hand side of the video. We will not address your questions until later on, but we will address them. So don't hesitate to ask a few questions. And so without further ado, let's take a look at one of my all-time favorite works, Glacial Decoy. That was Trisha Brown's Glacial Decoy from 1979, as reconstructed by the Stephen Petronio Company as part of Bloodlines. And you know, one of the beautiful gifts of that work coming to my company was that the female dancers in my company got to embody the work of one of the most searing minds and bodies of 20th century dance. And you know, I could only give them with my work a male's point of view. So it was a really beautiful thing to pass them Trisha's work.
Well, going off of that, what I want to ask Dava is, separate from this gender separation, there's also a connection. Stephen is like an artistic offspring of Trisha Brown in terms of the movement vocabulary, but it's also very different. So what was it like for you to get into a different body of Trisha's work after doing Stephen's work for years?
Well, it was actually pretty familiar in this way that I think that folks wouldn't expect it to be. Because when I do the movement, it's very relaxed in the joints in terms of you're not holding a lot of tension, and Stephen's work also requires that you're not like locking your joints in order to basically move really fast. So people would assume that you have to like, you know, muscle your way through moving fast, like, I gotta do it. But it's actually the opposite. It's about letting go and releasing and relaxing. And so the first move of vocabulary I've ever did was dancehall, reggae. So dancehall and reggae, you can't lock your joints in order to do those types of movements. So moving from the bones or moving in a way where your joints express themselves was something that was very familiar.
Well, so if the first way you danced was music was a big part of it, obviously, how did it feel to dance with absolutely no music at all in this piece?
Well, also the polyrhythm of the phrasing was something that I was attached to as well in terms of dancehall or Africanist-based movement, which after reading Brenda Dixon GLACIAL book, I found out that Trisha connected her kind of like movement exploration with the fact that she had a background in Black dance in terms of like some of her teachers and the way that kind of way of moving came out of her body. It's super polyrhythmic in that way that works that come out of the African diaspora have that polyrhythm. So you can sing the rhythm of the movement. Well, or at least I was able to sing an internal rhythm.
She studied with a particular teacher who taught Dunham technique and African dance, and her name was Ruth Beckford in the Bay Area. And Trisha studied with her, I think, before she came to the East Coast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was really refreshing to have like something that reminded me of like something familiar.
So I want to ask you something else, because the relationship between these photographs that travel across the space and the dance, it seems sort of almost random, but you can, as you're watching it, you can kind of keep track of both at the same time. But I wonder if you, as a dancer, was there any particular place in the movement where you looked up stage and you went, oh, it's that photograph. I know where I'm supposed to be because I'm over here and I'm seeing the dog's face or the cinder block or the bicycle or one of those images?
Well, when I was doing the center duet, absolutely not. Because if you're in the center and you have to kind of like know where to be in terms of like upstage, downstage, left stage, right? And then the movement on top of everything else, the memory of the slides was always the railroad crossing, because I was like, skip, skip. Oh, okay, it's so that was always the slide.
Relief.
So yeah, but in terms of when I was doing Trisha's role, I was able to connect the slides with the dancers because I wasn't on stage, so it was nice.
I want to say that, so in the video that we just watched, Dava was doing Trisha's role, which was like an Alfred Hitchcock appearance. And one of my favorite things ever, because you're watching this 20-minute dance and there's no Trisha Brown, and you get used to these four people, and then Trisha appears for like a nanosecond, like what is it, 20 seconds or something, 15 seconds. And so that was Dava's role to start. And then later she moved into the central duet for later performances that which you haven't seen tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Wendy, I have a question for you. Do you have a noted difference between when you left Trisha, she was just starting Glacial Decoy, and when I entered the company, she had just finished it. Do you have anything to add or say about the evolution of where her movement was when you were there and where it was going?
Well, the piece that we did before that was Splang, and we did that on a stage at the Public Theater, but it wasn't made for the stage in the way this piece was. And we actually did our own movement in that piece according to Trisha's written words, because her writing, the way she put words to movement was incredible. So I think probably the thing before that was Solo Olos, was maybe the really complicated phraseology that Trisha used. Solo Olos was, I think, the thing before Glacial Decoy. But Glacial Decoy is so like, a little thing will just like pop up and become something else. It's so springy, and that wasn't in the work before. I feel. I think that she really took that, like, where's my body going kind of thing, and like all of her work, she made the movement to sort of look and feel like it was improvised. So you sort of felt like your body was surprising you as you were doing it.
Well, that's an amazing thing about her work. And when you look at this work now, you have to realize that there was nobody moving like this. Her body, if you look at her film the film of Water Motor, which is a Trisha Brown solo that has this similar kind of movement as Glacial Decoy, and then you look at Glacial Decoy, people weren't moving like this, and that kind of extemporaneous vibe caught on stage wasn't really being done. Of course, everybody has learned how to do that now and kind of caught up.
Yeah, you're right. Water Motor was the movement thing that led into this piece. Because when we were doing Splang with our own movement, she was at the same time creating Water Motor and making like an inch of it every day.
Right.
Yeah. So really quickly, I was just wondering, you mentioned, Stephen, that from watching it, you kind of like absorbed a lot of things. I'm just curious, like, what are the components of the choreographic structure you kind of like absorbed into your own process?
Well, look, Glacial Decoy has got one of the clearest, most searing structures. It's very simple. It's a line of women that move laterally across the stage, and the end people go in and out of the wings, and then there's a central duet that emerges, and then it goes back to that quartet. Have I ever come close to being as pristinely simple as that? No. I'm a much more complicated person. But I think one of the things that I really took away from that work, two things. One is that being riveted on structure, and your idea for a work must go into the structure. It can't be something that's separate from the structure, from your idea of the work. Often I look at work and I see structural elements, but they're not really driving a narrative or a concept. So to merge concept with structure was something that I learned very early on from Trisha. And the other thing is, when she was throwing that movement out, that kind of lasso movement, I came into the world of soft rolling dancing, starting in contact improvisation. And so it's kind of a release vibe that was post Cunningham. And so she began to cast it out. And so that was something that was extremely attractive to me. And I think you could probably guess from where I went in the work that that I really pushed that extension into space. And the clues of it were in Glacial Decoy for me.
Mm-hmm. I want to say something else that I noticed about this. And I think that Rauschenberg sort of picked up on the task orientation that Trisha had in a lot of pieces, like you just do what you do and you don't make it fancy. And that's kind of coming from Anna Halprin. And those photographs are so work-centered, like they're different machinery or a carpentry thing or a tractor or something like that. And I felt like that work mode of Rauschenberg's kind of matched with the work mode of the dancers. Just breathe, you hear them breathing. It's not trying to have music transporting you, but you're right there with that work mode. And then layered with that is the nightgown fantasy mode, where you're sort of floating within these white clouds that you're wearing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely can attest to that. And the sense of like doing a task instead of like achieving a shape. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're very hard to pin Trisha down to a shape. Well, I think I could talk about Trisha with you guys all night long, but we should move on to
voting.
Well, sorry.
To voting.
No. We're gonna go to. We'll do that at the end. But yes, you can vote right now. You could pause this and go vote, please. So next up, we have Merce Cunningham's RainForest from 1968. And so when I was thinking about Bloodlines, there's an ongoing argument amongst some of my peers. Is Merce Cunningham part of the postmodern movement? And I don't really care about that argument at all. The postmodern world began around the Cunningham ethos and the Cunningham studio. And so I felt that when I was thinking about Bloodlines, how could I not start with Merce Cunningham? And and I immediately felt I need to do 3 works, because I never danced, I never danced Merce's work. And I just felt that how can I pick one? We should do 3 to kind of be the pillars of the Bloodlines work. And so RainForest for me was the obvious choice for a lot of reasons. And one of it is it has an intimate cast, and my company is smaller than Merce's company was toward the end of his life. But also, Merce got into a very abstract, fast, rhythmic-driven world in his later works, and that was more familiar to me. RainForest was this very intimate, primitive entities interacting on stage, and so that was new. That was something that we hadn't ever touched, and I thought it would be interesting for my dancers to experience that. Do you want to talk a little bit about RainForest, Wendy?
Well, I think it seems to me one of the slowest pieces where the dancers get to really move slowly, and there does seem to be this sort of animal like awareness of each other and low to the ground. When Merce made this, he was reading a book called The Forest People by Colin Turnbull, and Merce liked how they were pygmies and that there were things above them. And the man who wrote the book, Colin Turnbull, was really tall. And so the trees that were the right size for the population in that, the Congo, I think it was, the Belgian Congo. But
I think Australia. Was it not Australia?
I think that's Walk Around Time.
That's Walk Around Time, yeah.
Same year.
Yeah, okay.
But so the Andy Warhol's Silver Clouds fit perfectly this idea of something hovering above you.
So the work, it's Merce's choreography. David Tudor, the composer who changed the face of electronic music, and and Andy Warhol's Silver Cloud, which, by the way, was created before the work, and he lent it to Merce for this piece.
Yeah, I think Merce had seen it at a gallery.
Yeah. So,
and Jasper Johns.
Jasper John's doing the costumes. So our reconstruction, the Stephen Petronio Company's Bloodlines reconstruction, has live music by John Driscoll, Phil Edelstein, composers Inside Electronics, who I adore. We've toured through Europe and America with them, and we've done several other works of Cunningham's with them. I loved meeting those guys. So why don't you have a look at Merce Cunningham's incredible RainForest. Welcome back. That was Merce Cunningham's RainForest from 1968. And before I go any further, I really want to thank the Trust, the Cunningham Trust, for trusting me with RainForest, which, what a formidable place to start the Bloodlines project. You know, I must have been crazy when I made that choice, because it's such a beloved piece, but with beloved Cunningham casts all over the country and Europe. And they were quite supportive of our Bloodlines project. So I really want to thank them. And of course, the Trisha Brown Company for believing in the talent of my dancers.
And as I said before, your company is really the only company that's doing RainForest. So it's really great to see it. My first question to Deva is like the most obvious thing. Was it distracting to dance with those pillows? And did you ever run into a pillow, or did a pillow run into you when you least expected it?
It was what made the piece so much fun to dance. And it kind of like made it have an element of like chance, which is a part of the whole way in which Merce choreographed, in terms of like that thing that makes it alive, because the movement is so codified, that was an element of like, oh yay, I get to have this interaction with something outside of my body, and my body is going to respond how my body responds. And so I kind of always looked forward to it. And there would be a performance or two where I wouldn't have any interaction with it. And, you know, those were always like, oh, man, I didn't get to interact with it this show.
And also I have a question about the music, I guess for either of you. Did it change every time?
Every time.
Yeah.
And what a great surprise. You know, they would come with us on tour, and there would also be different configurations in different cities.
And the they was who? Who was the they who came with you?
The composers inside electronics, Phil and John Driscoll and Phil Edelstein. But they would bring in other people in different cities. And so they were following a score, which is a series of instructions that would direct them what to do, mostly a time signature instructions. So it was really very exciting to have different music in for each piece.
And also it was exciting to watch, because we didn't interact with the musicians until the week of the show. We didn't have any rehearsals with them. So when they did come in and lay out all the gadgets and all the things that you wouldn't expect, I think there was like wasn't there like a cereal box or something just absurd that you just wouldn't think.
Well, so they would amplify various found objects that to generate sound, and there was a table in the either in the orchestra pit or somewhere in the audience where they would play from, and it was incredible. There's actually a show touring of the RainForest instruments. I'm not sure where it is right now, but you can Google it and you can find it. It's really worth seeing.
I think I saw them at the Joyce. I think you did it with those two musicians at the Joyce, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question for Deva. What was it like being a master of my movement, or being like super engaged with my movement for so long, and then having to go to a work that required much more contraction of the muscles to execute, and then to go to someone like Trisha Brown where it was like, don't you dare contract anything. What was it like to make those changes?
Well, my background in terms of like formal training was with Horton, which is like very much so using big muscles and making these very angular shapes. And then of course ballet, and then Cunningham. So eventually I did study Cunningham, but then after getting into your company and not engaging with those more classical modern techniques, I completely went with the whole momentum and swing and, moving from the joints, which again, speaking about why, you know, I connect with your work and connected with Trisha's work felt more home, you know, more natural in my body. So I think about going back into that body that I was just watching. And it was almost like putting on an old pair of jeans that didn't fit, you know. That's kind of like the best way that I could describe that, because it's my jeans, yes, you know, I did do this back then, but the body is different. So I remember after like one of the first rehearsals, my quads were so tight, it was like hard to walk down stairs. So it was interesting to kind of engage in that way, which is funny because now doing yoga, I have a much more healthy balance between you know, contraction and release, which is interesting because at that point when I encountered Cunningham, I was like way on the release side and just a little bit, maybe a little too, you know, having fun in my joints. So it was very tight jeans.
It's probably difficult to, like, in the course of one show, sometimes there would be a Cunningham, a Brown, and a Petronio. Did you find, like, how did you make those quick changes? I mean, was it just go, or is it a mental thing, or?
I think it is kind of like at that point, it was a turning on a light switch. It's like flicking on like this, okay, now I'm here, now I'm there. And I think a lot of that had to do with, you know, Purchase and Ailey. That's what you're expected to do. You jump from an African class, a Dunham class, and now you're on point. So it's just, you know, two sides of of opposite coins doing it that way. So I had to kind of go back to what it was like, you know, when I was basically a student, in terms of how I can flick on and off those switches. But the wires were dusty. Yeah.
There's a question from the audience that's related to what you were saying, Dava. It's from Marion Schultz. And the question is to Stephen, but I think you could both address this. Stephen, how did your dancers adapt to the stillness and held positions in RainForest? And I think it's not only the heldness of the body, but the stillness that she's talking about, because there are a lot of still positions in RainForest.
Well, you know, one of the things that I'm constantly talking to my dancers about is when you stop, be still. And they tend to not be still in my work because there's such a rush of momentum that they've come from. And so even when they're in one place, I could see them not being still. And they really that was a very challenging thing for the dancers in the Cunningham work. And David, maybe you can talk more about that.
Yeah, definitely. I can think of like 3 roles that I've danced for the Petronio company over 13 years, where I've had to be still, like real, or move like uber slow. And it's that when I danced those 2 different roles in Lorraine, the first, which like the small with Jimena and Gino did it, but I was like understudying Gino, so it was like that slow pitch. So that was one of them, and then holding it there. So I kind of missed Adagio, actually, being in your company. So that's one of the things that for me, I did appreciate, having to go to those moments of like absolute stillness or doing Adagio. But again, it did remind me of like, I had to like call on, you know, those times where I was a student and what it felt like to be in this place where you have to, it's all out there. Everything's hanging out there. And people know, where's your pelvis? Are you turned out? How are your toes pointing? You know, all of those things. But yeah, definitely it took some adjusting.
Well, I'll say in line with that, the stillness, but also the visual focus on points in space when a dancer is dancing in Cunningham work is very, very specific. And you know, in the Petronio work, we alternate between going from a grid to a sphere. so that it, you know, so oftentimes you have to lose your orientation to execute the movement. And in Cunningham, you have to be oriented every second. And I think that was a big challenge too.
Dava, I'm so glad you mentioned Lorraine, because I loved that work. And I think it did do that, going between the spheres and the lines and stuff. What year was that?
1995, 1994. The music was David Linton. The costumes were Manolo. And it was a work, named after my mother. So, well, my mother's name was Lorraine, but the piece was called La Reina, the Queen.
Right. So Stephen, interesting that you were doing major collaborations even back then, way before Bloodlines.
Okay.
And what do you think influenced you to do these sort of heavy hitter visual artists and musical artists, and really make these major collaborations happen that early in your career?
Well, there's a lineage in contemporary art and in modern dance and contemporary dance of interdisciplinary collaboration. You see it with Cunningham. Well, you see it with Diaghilev and Nijinsky, and starting there. And then you know, I walked into the world where Cunningham and Cage and Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns, that was the way art was made. And then when I met Trisha, and I love telling this story, like the second week I was in Trisha's company, she said, well, I'm going to dinner at Bob's house. You want to come? And I was like, sure. Bob who? And she said, Bob Rauschenberg. And I said, well, who's Bob Rauschenberg? I really didn't know. Trisha introduced me to the art world, and she introduced me to all her friends. And so that's watching her world was my classical training, if you want to call it that. So that's what I knew to be interesting work. So, you know, my early collaborators weren't all heavy hitters. Some of them were boyfriends and friends and girlfriends and people that I, you know, just knew from going out. And then I just began to, at a certain point, I just began to stop wasting time and just look at the art that totally moved me, and just, I would contact those people, and sometimes they would say yes and sometimes they wouldn't. So
there's another question from the audience from, it looks like Leila Gassempour. It's to Dava. Was wondering, when you were on stage and performing, how did you control the order of the score for your movements and not get distracted by the temporal atmosphere of sound or pillow movements? So I remember you said a minute ago that you were sort of hoping that the pillows would intersect with you, but this question is, how did you not get distracted?
I think because the rehearsal process was such that I don't know if we've ever went over a singular movement ever in doing Stephen's work the way we went over every single movement down to like the eyelash of of the work. So it was so rehearsed to a certain degree that there and also it was taught like very fast. Like, you know, the first rehearsal, it was like, basically, here's the whole thing. So we learned the whole thing within, I think, like 2 weeks, and then there was a pause, and then we had like months of cleaning, lot of cleaning. So at that point, worrying about the steps or worrying about the environment or worrying about music, it was almost kind of like second nature in terms of like the choreography that I didn't have to worry about, and it was more so solid that what the environment was not at all a distraction, but almost like a welcomed entity.
I'm going to disagree with you. I need to disagree with you about how deep, or the deep dive into movement, because when we made movement together, it would go on for months and months and months. And
yes. Okay, so let me be more specific. A triplet, down, up, up, versus twist on twist. There's a lot more, and twist on twist for people who aren't familiar with the Petronio vocabulary, it's a movement where you use momentum and the twisting of the upper torso against the leg to kind of whip your leg around. So that type of movement to me in my body is very intricate. So that's the type of movement that we could believe, like really, you know, go over very, very specifically. But I feel like in your approach as a choreographer, I think that what I loved about your movement is that we codified things so much, but there still was freedom within there for interpretation. So, you know, there was still an ability, this is what it is, but I see, you know, how Gerald does it, or I see how Ashley does it, and I see that there's breath within what is right and what is wrong.
Well, I wonder if you were in when Merce was alive and you were in the company working with him, if there was that similar kind of thing. It's hard to say what that was like.
But I think the act of reconstructing, like in the movie, If the Dancer Dances, sometimes there'd be two Cunningham reconstructors discussing among themselves what would be the exact right movement. And so there was a lot of attention to doing it right. And Stephen, I wonder if you felt, you know, with your own work, there was a certain freedom. This is my work. I'm the choreographer. I'm doing it. But with reconstructing Trisha Brown or Merce Cunningham, did you feel sort of a pressure to like make it right? It's got to be right. It's got to be right.
Well, let me say that the works were reconstructed by extremely talented teams of people that come from the Cunningham Trust and the Trisha Brown Company. And because I was in the Trisha Brown Company and very close friends with Diane Madden, who was reconstructing, I had a lot to say about the version of Glacial Decoy that we got. And nobody else has ever had that version. And Diane really went into it with me in a very deep way. With Cunningham for RainForest, I was like, I didn't know what to do with myself. And I was way too present for RainForest. In the subsequent two pieces, I really stepped back and took almost, you know, stopped coming to rehearsals every day because they had their job to do. They knew what they were doing and they were going to take care of it. They didn't need me to take care of it. So,
and one of those pieces was Tread, right? Tread or Signal?
Yeah, it's like Tread and Signals.
Tread, and they both had so much humor in them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, let's not talk about those. But we have to wrap it up because we're, any last questions that we want to get to?
I just want to say one last thing, just to kind of like clarify. I do agree that there's a huge difference between like being in the room with the choreographer and being in the room and originating a role versus recreating in terms of like how much liberty and how much freedom. And then also working with something that is very codified, you know, and then something that is, your work has a lot of specificity, but I would say very similarly to Trisha's work in terms of like, there's task and there's also aspects that are very specific, but you haven't codified a technique. You know what I mean? You haven't like written down, you know, a technique that is where people can say, oh, well, you know, this person's twist on twist is wrong.
Right. So let me ask you one last question, and maybe I'm opening up a can of worms here, but so you've been through my work and you've been through Bloodlines. And how do you feel that's impacted your own work?
I definitely feel that it makes me appreciate the fact that I danced with you and that I landed in the best possible place for me as an artist, because I connected so deeply to the movement and the process. A lot of the improvisation that is present in the way that you're making movement. And after like watching a documentary about Trisha Brown and hearing how her process was in terms of like throwing and catching, and then seeing how your process is, it's almost like a variation on that. Not exactly the same thing. I always joke around with my students where I created my own thing where I call it rapid fire in terms of, I always say, you know, Trisha Brown would go and she'd codify her thing and come back and just do it. And the dancers had to like learn it. Steven will go like, okay, here's the move. And then everybody would do the move. And then Steven would be like, no, it's more like this. And then it would be like, okay, it's like this. And then he'd be like, no, it's more like this. And it's like, no, I saw this. And so we would, you know, like you said, we would belabor over the movement, but then there was always something that was so alive about it, because how do you write about that movement? You know, how do you write about energy moving through the body and out into space? It's larger than the body in terms of that. And so I've definitely taken away, and with my students, I just, or my dance company members, I do it once and I say, I'm not gonna make Steven's mistake, I'm just gonna do it once. That's all you get.
Much easier on your body.
Yeah, exactly.
So we should wrap it up. I love
Can I say one thing before we wrap it up? I just want to say that I always appreciated you, Deva, on stage in Steven's work. You're such a strong female presence, and I always appreciated that. Just want you to know.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Steven.
I miss you terribly. I want to thank these two incredible artists for joining us today. I want to remind you that next week we'll have Wendy back for a discussion about Rudy Perez's coverage revisited, Halperin's Courtesan and the Crone. Go to the website. I don't have to tell you this, but you better go and vote. I don't care. There's no excuses. Please go vote. And then I just want to show you this little t-shirt that I'm wearing. So last week I wore the white version of this. This is Cindy Sherman and Narciso Rodriguez have collaborated, and they've made this t-shirt and 100% of the proceeds goes to Planned Parenthood. So if you're in the mood for a t-shirt, go to Narciso Rodriguez's Instagram feed, and you'll get directed to how to buy one of the shirts. It's an important moment for us. We all know how important it is. I know we're all really nervous and freaking out. Buy a t-shirt, support Planned Parenthood. It might relieve a little tension. Also, there's a masterclass beginning tomorrow. So you have to register to get the Zoom link. So you can go to the Petronio website to do that. We do this because we miss you. We don't know what else to do. We're going to keep trying to find ways to contact you. I'm keeping my dancers employed through the spring. If you got a couple of shekels, send them our way. No pressure, but if you got a little extra, send a donation in. We love you. We miss you. We can't wait to dance in front of you and with you again. So thank you, everybody. Happy Halloween!
Happy Halloween!